Sounds good.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Counselor Connect session. We are excited to be joined by Kyle Miller and Nicole Newman. They are both from Westfield, Washington schools, and they are going to be sharing with us PLC cycles for counselor and social work leaders. So again, if you want to follow along with the slides, I will drop those again here in a minute into the chat. If you have any issues getting into those, just shoot me a direct chat and we'll get you all settled. We are recording the session as we do all of our sessions. So if you need to jump off for whatever reason or need to go back and listen again to any of the information that they shared today, then this will be available in our digital content library for later viewing. So with that, I am going to go ahead and hand it over to Kyle to get us started.
Sure. Well, thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everybody. It's really good to be with you this morning. Hopefully this finds you well and all things are good in your district and in your school. We're excited to share with you a little bit about PLC cycles. And just, I think, to start and frame this up, it's important for us to think about PLC cycles in the sense that sometimes in the school counseling world, in the social work world, there are different school or district initiatives that sometimes we feel like or we think that it doesn't really apply to us, right? In our world of school counseling and social work and mental health support or even RTI. And so my hope is that through the course of today, you'll see how the PLC process and the framework provided by the PLC process can really help guide and drive some of the work that we do as school counselors, social workers, as we move forward. So, but who am I? I'm Kyle Miller. I'm the Director of Student Support and Counseling Services for Westfield, Washington Schools, which is really just a fancy way of saying I support all things school counseling, school social work, facilitate our mental health partnership with our contracted behavioral health provider, McKinney-Vento, DCS, all of that from the district level, try to help coordinate and support the good work that's happening in our district. And I have with me a colleague of mine, Nicole Newman.
Hi, I'm Nicole Newman. I am the counselor at Maple Glen Elementary in Westfield. We are a K-4 building, and I am very excited to share what we've been doing over here.
Yeah, great. I should probably say that before moving into this role too at the district level, I was a school counselor for 13 years at the intermediate level, so grades 5 and 6. So spent 13 years hanging out with 10 to 12-year-olds, walking alongside them to hopefully help support them and their families. So moved into this role about 5 to 6 years ago with the hopes of continuing to help support and align some of the systems that we have within our district. So what we will be sharing with you today is the result of some of that work as we think about alignment, as we think about integrating what we do in our roles around the PLC process as well. So here's what we're doing. You can see on the screen, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of identifying essential skills, hopefully give you a quick picture of how we've gone about that process and the shift maybe that happened with us that may resonate with you, or you may already be doing this and we're just late to the game, which is very possible. But to share with you a little bit about some of our mindset shifts and how we do that. And then Nicole is really going to be the bulk of what we do today, talking about how we got to the point that we are right now. She'll walk you through the PLC cycle work that she's doing with grade level teams at the elementary level, and then hopefully provide you with some examples and some things to take away, or at least some templates and some things to think about that may help you as you navigate the conversation of PLC cycles with either grade level teams or as a school as it pertains to this work. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about identifying essential skills. If you're familiar with the PLC process, you're familiar with the 4 critical questions that are asked through this process. Question number 1 is, what do we expect all students to know and be able to do? It's a great question to start with. The mindset shift for us has been that a lot of times in our work, we have looked to a program or a curriculum that would help direct our work. So we would go look at like a Second Step or any other program that might be out there take that program and then begin working off of the scope and sequence that that program has provided, right? One of the things that we have found and may resonate with you is that I have not found one single curriculum or program that teaches everything that needs to be taught. Typically what we find is like, hey, this is missing, or I don't think this goes before this, right? And that's the work of that collaborative team to really think through, what does this look like? So we've shifted our mindset a little bit to go to, how do we as a collaborative team, and I'll define that as 6 elementary school counselors representing different schools in our district, and also including teachers, admin, related arts, special education teachers. How do we go through a process to think about, at the elementary, what are the most essential skills that all kids need to know and be able to do that help contribute to their success in school, but ultimately in life as well? And so that was our starting point, not necessarily a curriculum or a program. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we just had to shift our mindset a little bit to think about, what do we think here in Westfield with our kids and our knowledge of them, what are the most important skills? So we looked through the employability skills that are mandated by the state of Indiana to be taught in K-12 schools. And there's a lot of good standards within the employability skills. But this is where the PLC process comes in for us. Our academic teachers and our academic teams have done a great job of taking an academic standard, which we know is very broad, and then unwrapping that academic standard into specific learning targets. One of the things we found as a team is we looked at a standard in the employability skills, and from our different perspectives, we might have thought that this was asking kids to do and know different things. We didn't have consensus because it was a broad standard, right? So our whole process is, how do we begin to identify what those essential standards are, and then take those essential standards and unwrap them into learning targets? Then that helps us to determine what is our scope and sequence. Once we've done that, then we look to our different curriculums that are out there, our different resources, what we would call curricular resources that help us teach that. So the shift is, we drive what's essential. We drive unwrapping that essential standard into a specific learning target that is clear and actionable. And then we go and look for different resources that help us teach those essential standards, as opposed to starting with that and whatever this program or this curriculum gives us, and then we sort through it. Like, we're the ones, through the employability skills at the state of Indiana, driving that conversation of what's important for our kids. So that was a little bit of a shift. I don't know if that resonates to you, for you, or if that's even something that's important to you, but it was for us as we continue to do that. So, and then the next step in our process is, once we've identified what's essential, we've unwrapped that into specific learning targets, and we've pulled different resources together to help us teach that skill, then we provide the direct instruction, right? That's where our counselors, and Nicole's going to talk a lot about what that's looked like for us at the elementary level and how we've evolved over the years. And also, then we also know what PLC question number 2 is. How do we know that students have got it? We've taught it. We've identified what's essential. We've taught it. Now, how do we know that they've got it? And then, what type of systematic supports do we need to put in place for students who need additional time and support to master that skill? And also, what do we do with students who have already got that skill and are ready for more leadership opportunities, or to take that skill to the next part? So that 5-step process for us through the PLC process really did help frame up where we are now and drive the work that you're going to hear Nicole talk a lot more about, which is probably way more interesting than everything I just set up for you at the district level in terms of just that comprehensive look. So I'll be quiet now, and I'll turn it over to Nicole to talk about how these 5 steps have impacted and influenced the work that we're doing at the school level.
Okay, well, thank you for setting that up. So how we got to PLC cycles is kind of a windy little road, as it usually is. Our tier 1 programming has consistently been doing like morning meetings, or we call them circle up, and then also counselor delivered lessons. But we were finding that as we were working on doing the PLC process here at my building, I just kept looking at it and thinking there's got to be a space for for SEL or for our employability skills in this. And so we just kept talking about it as a group and how could this work. So I'm going to take you on our little journey here. So we started with, this is what our community circles look like in the morning. The teachers have this Google slide. And so they have all the skills of the week over here on the left, where they know exactly which of those essential skills that we identified as a group that Kyle talked about, that district group identified, our employability skills. How we go through that is they'll click on the day, and then this is a time every day, every morning, that is explicitly taught. So one example might be, oops, where am I clicking? Here we go. Very first day of school, we talk about these are the circle up expectations. And then we go into the next few days, giving them very structured circle up activities. We talk about what does it mean to look at somebody and be respectful with your body. And then we also use it. It's really nice to have that as a responsive piece too. For our building specifically, we'll talk about our school rules and what does that mean in your classroom. And so our teachers really enjoy having this time to build relationships with their students, but they also wanted it to be very specific to what our building needs. So for example, in September, so this month, we are working on specifically talking about our leaf leaders, which is kind of like a PBIS, where these are this is our acronym that we talk about who we want our kiddos to be. We want them to be learners and empathetic, accountable, and flexible. So each day is teaching that. And so we'll go through and teach those things, what it looks like. And then we'll also, and next week, we kick off the zones of regulation. So talking about regulation. And the teachers know every week on Mondays, I'm on the announcements and I read off those skills of the week, those I Can learning targets. And the different slides in this month look like talking about having a discussion. If you see there's like the orange circle, that's our SIOP slides. So then it takes our student learners that are learning English. They have maybe on their own iPad, they can open this up, read it in their home language, and then have a sentence stem so that they can then participate with their neighbors in the discussion. And some days it is a video and they'll watch something and learn about it and chat about it as a group. So that's our one way that we do tier 1 programming. And then we also, of course, have counselor delivered classroom lessons, which is something we all do as counselors or social workers. We go into the classrooms for 30 minutes once a month and deliver whatever topic it is. A long time ago, my topics used to be the CASEL competencies. And so in the month of August, I would go in and tell them all about self-awareness, and then I would leave and I would come back in September and I would talk about self-management. And it was okay. And it did accomplish what I needed to do as a tier 1 program. It gave a baseline of all the different things that they needed to learn throughout the year, but it didn't seem very connected to what they were doing in the classroom. So I started to link my lessons with whatever they were doing in those morning meetings or those circle ups. So if they were working on conflict resolution, when I would come in, I would teach a lesson either right before they were learning about it, during, or right after as a follow-up. So for example, if they were learning about iMessages that day, this would be the slide that they were talking about in their morning meeting. And then when I came in, I would follow up on that. So if I'm setting it up for them, if I know they're getting ready to talk about iMessages next week, I might talk with them about all the different, and we have our Kelso's Choices is our conflict resolution program. So I might be bringing in my frog Kelso and talking to them about all the different ways you can solve a problem so that when they go into the iMessages the next week and they talk about the I need part, they have some ideas to pull from. And if I go into a lesson during that time, this is for 4th grade, I was getting to them after they had already learned about iMessages, but we were talking about the tone of voice that you could use. So then I get to go in and I get to practice it with them. So I'm not the one maybe doing the direct instruction on how to, or what is an iMessage, but I get to come in and talk about how to and build on what they're already doing. And the teacher feedback I had from doing both the morning meetings this way and then structuring my lessons that they were supporting what they were talking about was that they were actually seeing that happening in the classroom. So we talked about, do we use something like second steps? Is it something that we need a program? But what they were finding was it was really helpful to be able to be responsive to what we were doing. And we had flexibility with what we were teaching, and we were specifically using the Indiana Employability skills. And it felt like we were still very explicitly teaching those things. And so then when I was like, oh gosh, look at this great gains that we're having. Kids all of a sudden were using these statements. They were thinking about all the different things that they were learning in Circle Up. And then the teachers were using that language during the day. Then I would come in and teach a lesson, and it felt like that depth of knowledge was really great. So I thought, well, if one lesson a month seems to really enhance that, maybe I should do units like they do in school. So that's where I sat down and I got a little bit greedy. And I started working with kindergarten at the beginning of the year, doing a lesson once a week for like 8 weeks, building school skills. And the kindergarten team loved it. The kindergartners loved it. I got to know them really well because I was seeing them really frequently. And we saw a lot of success with building upon what the lesson I taught the last week, having the morning meetings, connecting with it. And it was all very exciting as we got through that unit. Then my 4th grade team heard about this and they were like, hey, we heard about these units you're doing. Would you do that with us for executive functioning skills? So I started doing that with them in January of that year and met with them once a week for about 2 months. And they thought that was awesome and thought, okay, let's do it with another team. And then for a couple of years, I actually was doing little units, but the first year was not able to get to 2nd grade. So the next year when I was planning everything out, I thought, okay, I'm going to start with kindergarten as always. Then I'm going to go to 4th grade because I know they want this, and then 2nd grade, and then I'll get to everybody, except that I couldn't because there's one of me. And there's a lot of grade levels and a lot of classrooms, and I just couldn't figure out how to get it to all fit. And at the same time as when I was telling kindergarten, hey guys, I'm not going to be able to come into your classroom for the first 8 weeks of school. I just don't have that kind of time. We had added a kindergarten section, and just like everywhere, we were growing too much. And I was telling them this bad news, and they were also finding out that we were going to adjust the way that our district did behavior monitoring, and we were getting away from the clip chart. And some of the teachers still used the clip chart in their classroom all day long to help monitor behavior, teaching behavior. And they were just like this very low level sense of panic that they were not going to have me coming in, and they weren't going to have their behavior management system of the clip chart anymore. And so I sat down with them and talking with them about like, hey, we know that kids need to learn behaviors, and we know that they benefit when I come in once a week and do these lessons, but I can't anymore. So how can I help you do this? And as we talked about it and what that might look like, it started sounding a lot like the PLC cycle. So I started doing PLC cycles with kindergarten. And if you aren't familiar with what that might look like, it kind of is these 2 different pictures. So the first one, those 4 critical questions that Kyle talked about a little bit of, what do we want students to be able to do? So first we had to really identify what we wanted them to learn. We had to look at those essential skills, and they had all of them, right? They wanted them not to tattle. They wanted them to regulate their emotions. They wanted them to solve the problems. And it was like, whoa, let's slow down a minute. And how do we look at the beginning of the year, and what do they really need to be able to do? Then you talk about how do they learn it. This gets into assessing, which is really tricky with our employability skills. What does that look like? But then it does lead to those tier 2 services of how do we help the kids that haven't gotten it yet? And then also, who are some of those leaders that we're missing out there that we can enrich? So you start with that first question, and then you start going around this cycle here and figure out your action plan. A common assessment was where we would get kind of stuck a little bit, and I'll show you some examples of those. Then the teachers taught it, and this was that big shift, right? I wasn't teaching it. I wasn't coming into their classrooms anymore for that purpose. I was still coming in for other lessons, but they were teaching it 4 days a week. And we had to give them permission to do that. And so what did that look like? Well, for us, after a lot of discussion, it looked like doing it during our what I need time, our win time, where our students weren't necessarily going to be taken out for extra intervention during that time. That was happening during a different time. So the teachers were able to set that aside because it was what they needed. It was what the students needed to get those tier 1 skills. Then after you go through and figure out what they have learned, that's when I came back to the picture and started figuring out, okay, which students, based on the assessment, the data, which students needed support and which students could we enrich. So I have a few examples of what that looks like. And I'm expecting Kyle to keep me on track because I will talk about this a lot. And if you have any questions, let me know, because it's very exciting. And once you kind of get going in it, it's awesome. So I will start with, this is just an unpacking a sample, an example that we use. Chad Dumas is a support that we have through Solution Tree. And he comes and meets with us as a district, and then he comes to our buildings and talks with us about what our needs are and gives us all sorts of amazing supports and how we can meet those goals. So one of the tools that he shared with us that I have used over and over and over is this one. And I didn't use it at first. And then once I kind of got into the habit of using it, it really became very quick. It looks like a lot of stuff, and it is, but it's very, very helpful in walking through each one of those steps. So we're going to go through a cycle and look at how they fit together. The first one is when we look at that question number 1, what do we want them to be able to do? Well, the kindergarten, or this was actually a first grade cycle that I ended up doing because I did the kindergarten cycle, and then 4th grade heard about it, and then they wanted a cycle, and then 1st grade. So last year I ended up doing 5 cycles, one with each grade level. And this was the last one I did last year. So I'm sharing it because it's better than the first one, but there are still things about it that we're making better this year. So the first step is really looking at your 1 standard. What I learned at first with kindergarten, we tried to do, I think, 4, and that was way too many. So we did 1 standard the next go round, and looking at what that means. So you highlight some words, you underline some things, you put brackets around, like what exactly are we looking at? And doing this with the teachers and their team was so beneficial because they want their students to be able to play games, and they want them to be able to work together. But what does that actually mean? So the step 2 is to look at those learning targets. Well, that's what our district committee had done. So we looked at those learning targets and what do they look like? What are they? Do the teachers know? Sometimes they don't. And so it was a great time for us to sit down and discuss it. And then my favorite step, I think, of all is then what are the implicit learning targets? What are these hidden things that we expect students to know, that we want them to know, but they maybe don't? So for knowing how to play a game and work together, students, we need to know how to have eye contact. What does it mean to have whole body, say whole body listening there? Do they know how to respond when other people are just talking to them? Do they know about timing and what that might be like? What does it mean for them to know when to share instead of just blurting out? So the 1st grade team really wanted them to be able to respond appropriately and not listen to a kid talk about a game and then the other student respond totally off topic. Then we sequence the learning targets, and this is pretty basic. The teachers are way better at this than I am. And so they told me, hey, we're going to teach it in this order because it is the natural buildup of how things go. And they just moved a couple around. And then we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to assess it? Now, I learned this the hard way that you really need to do this before you start teaching. The first time I did it with a kindergarten group, we were kind of building the plan as we were flying it. We were thinking, okay, we want them to have these skills. They started teaching about it, but we didn't know exactly what the assessment was going to be at the end. So now, before we even get started, and really before we even start picking out some of the materials we're going to use, we have to figure out, what is that assessment going to look like? What is it that we want them to know? And then when we pop into the second step of how will we know they have learned it, I added this little box to Chad's chart because I think with our teachers that they're focused on all of these broad learning topics all day long. They're teaching all the different things. They're maybe not 100% sure what does proficiency actually look like. So as we talked about those implicit learning targets, when we know students will be able to go off into the world and play a game and interact with each other, what would that actually look like? So that took those implicit targets and really clarified them into what the teachers wanted to see. When we are walking through a classroom, what should we see the students doing? So we made a list, and then we put together a rubric. And I had only up until this point done some like teacher checklists that felt good because the teachers had their eyes on the kids, but also a little subjective. And then we had done kind of multiple choice with fourth grade, but that didn't feel right for first grade. We did some exit tickets and some quick checks that were easy to see to make sure that our lessons were going well. But as a common formative assessment, something that the whole grade level was going to do, it was all going to be the same so that we could all have the same expectations. A rubric was what the first grade team brought to me. And I was like, wow, guys, I love this. How do you do a rubric? And so we sat down, our instructional coach helped us look at our criteria. So at the top, it has the criteria that is aligned with our report card. So when parents saw it and families were looking through it, they weren't trying to figure out something that was different than what they were already used to seeing all year long. Then we took each of those skills, those I can statements, and broke them down into what would actually be appropriate. What would be not yet, getting ready, and proficient in that. One thing we did was plug it into Chat GPT, and it spit out this beautiful rubric, and we just then went through and added some of the human elements to that of the things that we were really looking for. So it was really helpful to really define what it was that we wanted the students to be able to do. And I knew what that might look like in my head, but I didn't know what the first grade team thought that was going to look like in their classrooms, out at recess. We were gearing up for field day, which was why they chose this too. And it was a lot of the end of the year group work. So it was really a beneficial conversation for us to have to talk about what exactly is it that we're looking for, which then also really helped clarify if they don't have it, which students don't have that, what do they need? So then they decided to teach it. We they only taught it for 4 days. They had each learning target that they did a lesson with. And then at the end of those, they had kind of quick exit tickets. So that's not necessarily something that they're going to grade each student on, but the teachers are looking through it to make sure that the lesson itself was effective. So it might be something, oh, I skipped ahead. They also would use consistent visuals. So I was really excited because that's a visual that kindergarten uses. And then all of a sudden we're getting into some better alignment between our kindergarten and first grade, talking about what does it mean to have whole body listening. But they would do one of the exit tickets that they used was just some little puzzle pieces. They also had this roll and read, which I was like, I don't know what that is, guys. Tell me about it. Where students know how to do this, they know the expectations, but they were working in partners and playing different games and doing this. So they taught these specific skills, and the way that they taught it was just the way that I would go in, I would introduce the topic, I would teach them explicitly, what does it look like, what does it sound like, and then we would practice it. And so the teachers were doing that part of it, and then we're getting feedback and adjusting their lessons as they needed to right there in the moment. It wasn't something that then, if I was in there in September teaching them about this, I noticed the lesson didn't go great, but then when I came back in October, I had to start talking about collaboration. The teachers were the ones that were going to be able to adjust that, and they were doing it right there, responsive right in the moment. So any questions? Am I leaving anything out yet, Kyle?
No, but I'm going to jump in real quick just for a
Okay.
couple things that I was thinking about as you were talking. Number one, a thing that we hear in our world as school counselors and social workers when it comes to this work is I'm a teacher. I'm not a counselor. This doesn't apply to me, and I'm happy when you come into my room because it does give me a chance to kind of maybe grade papers or do something. But we know from our perspective, we feel like those are random acts of guidance, right? Like we come in, we deliver it, and we leave, and it's not connected to anything. Um, they're not counselors, but they are teachers, and they do a really good job of teaching. So when we can identify specific skills and engage them in the process through a collaborative team of how to teach these, you get way more buy-in, right? This is very different than a team of social workers and counselors creating a big scope and sequence and then giving it to teachers and saying, here, teach this 3 times a week. When you actively engage them in the PLC process, from all the way from identifying what do you guys think is essential for your kids right now, and how do you think we can teach this? And then I'm here to support you with resources and also maybe come in and provide a reinforcement lesson afterward. And now, as your school counselor or your social worker, I'm going to help you provide some tier 2 support for kids that we've identified need additional time and support. And teachers are going to, one thing that Nicole didn't mention is that this rubric also goes to parents, right? Like we're having this open conversation between teachers and parents because this is a partnership, right? Like we have to ensure that our parents are part of this process and that they understand what, number one, what we're teaching, and number two, if we're seeing that their student needs a little bit more time and support, we're communicating that with them and saying, hey, here's some supports that are in place at school through Mrs. Newman or a social worker that can help build the skill that we've trying to teach them. And we want to come alongside you as a parent to help you do that. That whole process is way more engaging, in my opinion. And it seems to be way more successful for teachers than saying, here's a curriculum, go teach it. Which is typically then you get the response, I'm not a counselor, like that's not my role. Just involves them in the process, I think, a little bit more, which is good. So those are a couple things that I was thinking about, Nicole, as you were talking.
For sure. Thanks. Yeah. And it's 4 days, and then they would spend the next week assessing. And so they took this rubric, which, yes, thank you, Kyle, they sent home to families. And it actually, what the teachers found was a fantastic way to get families involved in, like, hey, this is what we're teaching. Think about what you're seeing at home. But then when it did come time after this, the teachers had gone through and watched their kids do it. So like for 5 days, they played games, and the teachers would pick maybe 5 kids each day and then walk around and fill out the rubric as they were observing the kids playing. So then they sent these home, which the families already knew was going to be coming. The kiddos that did have lagging skills, it wasn't a surprise for the teachers and for the families. And it was able for teachers to have good conversation with those families because they had concrete data to say, yeah, we were playing this game and this is what happened. I've also noticed that this is how they react out at recess, or I've had times where they are having a hard time regulating with this. It gave the teachers better conversation points than me calling up a family and saying, hey, your teacher referred your student for this group, which we've all been in a situation where that does not go very well because the parent's like, what do you mean? So yes, and I was just been really happy to be able to support the teachers in a way that they feel like they're better connected to their students. and they really feel like they understand the employability skills as well. So it was very great. And then I'm going to go through the data part of this next. So once we got all that data, there's also a process for that. So how do we look at it? There's a data protocol. It has, I think, 7 steps. This first box here where they have each of the teachers, they don't put their names on it, but they put their stuff up there. Some teachers put their names on it, some don't. Some grade levels, it just depends. Eventually we get to a point where everybody has their stuff on there, and then they might talk about, hey, look at this, I did really, really well, or this lesson tanked in my class. What were you doing in your classroom that it went so well? Their SMART goal was for them to have 80% students meet proficiency, which was 10 out of 12 on this rubric. And they got to 78%. So they were really excited about that. And then I was able to pull the kids that were not proficient yet. But one of the things that I was really surprised about and very much enjoyed was that when we put this data up, the teachers, the team, had a great discussion about what each of them looked like. So if you look at teacher number 1, she had 22 kids that were proficient and only 1 that wasn't. Teacher 2 had 3 or 13 that were 3 that were close, and then she had 6 that weren't proficient. And she was like, oh my gosh, why do I hate my class so much? This is terrible. I feel like I was so hard on them, opposed to teacher 1 who didn't have quite as many. And what we found was that her classroom did have a cluster of kids that had extra support given to them for special ed services. And they have those services for a reason. There are lagging skills there. And we ended up talking with the special ed teacher and looking at what they were working on and how we could team together to support them. But it wasn't unexpected that they were going to have a harder time with collaborating. So when we took that little cluster of kiddos out, it actually fit right in line with everyone else. Teacher 1 was like, I wonder if I didn't really understand exactly what I was supposed to be looking for. She's like, I think I was too easy on my class. So it provided us to have a really good conversation about what that should have looked like. And then they talked about how the next time they do a rubric, they're going to go through a scenario and circle different things and talk about what each one might actually look like. So it provided us provided them a really great talking point, and I just listened and learned. So that was awesome to see, and helped me knowing with the next grade level when we used a rubric what I need to prepare and be looking for. The next part of the data protocol is just to answer some of the questions. So like, what exactly did they do well in, and what strategies did we use that worked well? And so with the teachers, we're talking about the specific lessons that they taught. Well, we really liked these games. They liked one of the games that they used. They felt like it showed the skills better than another one of their games. When we talked about number 4, where did they struggle? They were like, man, throwing dice was a bad idea. We need to explicitly teach that before we do that. It's one thing when it's a station and there's 5 or 6 stations happening in the class that are different and just one station has dice. But then apparently what they found is when you give 26 first graders dice and they start rolling it, that chaos ensues. So that was a great learning moment for us there. And then what do you need for those students that need additional time and support? So we talked a lot about what does that look like now. This was towards the end of the year. So our student mentor and I pulled intervention groups during their intervention time. But then next year they talked about number 6 for enrichment. They really want to do a peer mediator program, and what might that look like? So we just kind of went through each of these questions. And then eventually after we did the intervention, we would assess again and see if we were able to bump up over that 80% mark, and if those kids that were in those small groups were able to meet those skills. I have a couple other examples of what exactly this part right here, the little blue box, the determine who got it, who needs more time, but then also what are the effective teaching practices? And this was something that came out of my work with the cycles that I was really surprised and happy to have learned about. was the informal exit tickets. It's a way for me to walk out of a lesson knowing whether it was effective without having to do a whole common formative assessment. I'm not going to do that at every lesson, and the teachers aren't going to do it after every lesson either. And so one of my learnings from them was to use some of these informal exit tickets. So I'm going to show you some examples from our 4th grade one, which was about collaboration. So they were learning how to work together as well. But they had very specific things that they taught. So like the first thing that they talked about, which you saw on a slide earlier that I went in and reinforced, was aggressive, passive, and assertive language. And so they just did this quick matching and what you think that it was. And then they turned that into the teachers. They looked at it. If they felt their kids didn't get it, they would revisit it the next day. Same thing for iMessages. They had to list them out and they had to apply it. So this was a part that I think it's kind of tricky with our employability skills. Yeah, I can say that I know what an iMessage is. I can name the 3 parts. I can even tell you a really good way to solve the problem, but am I going to actually use it? Well, they had to show that they could apply it to a situation. They also ended up doing a visual where when they heard students or students were self-reporting that they were using the iMessages or they were using aggressive or hopefully more assertive tones and solving problems the right way, they were given class points. And so they could see that the kids were using these. They were getting class points for a lot of things, but the class points for specifically collaboration were a different color. And so the teachers were keeping an eye on were the kids actually applying these skills. And it was very exciting for me to walk by and see all the collaboration skill class points that they were getting. Another one was just a quick multiple choice. So they taught about win-win. The kids that these teachers like paper pencil. I ended up working with 2nd grade who liked Google Forms. They love the Google Forms and their kids knew how to use them because they had been taught how to use them by the 2nd grade teachers. So it really depends also on your grade level and what works for them, which is kind of nice because I got to use how to learn a bunch of different things. And they taught me all sorts of great stuff. Now, when I go in for a lesson, I might use, whoops, there it is. I might use just something really quick, like having this up on a slide and having them come up with Post-it notes and saying, okay, what's something that you might say to your guard dog to remind yourself to stay calm? And they write it on a Post-it note, they come up and they stick it up there, and then I'll take them off and read through them. And what I found is very quickly, I needed to be more explicit on some sentence stems and some different ways that they could do that. Otherwise, they were all over the board. And so these informal exit tickets have been a very quick and easy way for me to assess my lesson and adjust it. So sometimes I would adjust it and go back into the classroom and reteach, or I would tell the teacher, hey, can you make sure that you touch base with your class on this? And I would then improve it for the next time I went in. Common formative assessments are more of that end of unit assessment. So you've taught all the things. So again, this is with that 4th grade. So they taught those little things first, the win-win, how to respond to people, and then they did a common formative assessment. So these are the results. They did do that one in a Google form so that they could all see it at the same time. And I could also get into it and see it. These are just a couple examples. So what we found, so this was the question, and right next to it is the data from that. They really know what bullying is. We really know what that is, but they were still having a little bit of trouble. This is a mean moment versus a rude moment. Now, 84% of the kids knew what the rude moment was, but you can see there's a little bit of a confusion, more so than with some of the other questions. The other questions, like down here, the bullying, it was only a couple of kids that got confused. And same thing for the next one. It's just a couple of students that didn't quite get it right, and that's expected. But they noticed that with the mean moment and the rude moment, they needed to go back and maybe clarify just a little bit. So they were able to talk more about with their kids about like, the importance for that is how do you respond? How assertive do you need to be if somebody's being rude? Maybe not as assertive as if they're being mean, and you need to be very explicit with them in your iMessage about what you need them to stop doing or how you need them to solve that problem. So those were some common formative assessment things. They also did iMessages, and this is more like that applying it, which one sounds appropriate. And this is where, when at the end of the assessment, we looked at all the kiddos that had answered, and for kids that fell in those lagging skills or not proficient, those were the students that I took for groups. And so when we were contacting families about that, it was like, hey, here is the common formative assessment. Your student still has some lagging skills. They weren't quite at proficiency. Mrs. Newman or Miss Garcia, our student mentor, we split up these groups and we just retaught these skills using some different strategies, maybe using some books, sometimes just talking more in depth with a small group and reteaching it and having them practice it was all that they needed. But it was easier to have that data right in front of us and know what we wanted to do. This is an
Can I
example
jump
of,
in a couple things?
oh, sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
that's so good because it's so exciting to me. And a couple things, if I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, wow, this takes a lot of time. How in the world do you do all of this? And I think for us, and again, this may not be your situation, but our teachers are so used to the PLC cycle because that's what they're doing every single day. That's how they are organizing their lessons. That's how they're determining their scope and sequence. That's how they're determining what's essential academically. Like, this is their process, right? We're just joining them in that. And so what sounds like takes a lot of time, when your teachers are proficient in the PLC process and they are using that every single day, and their collaborative team is a group of third graders, it doesn't take a ton of time. Your PLC meeting, Nicole, may have been 30, 40 minutes as you determine what's essential, create a rubric. Like, that's the piece of it. If the PLC process is in place for you, that's where we're. So, and then a broader thought on that. If the PLC process isn't in a process for you, what process is being used by your teachers to plan lessons, to work collaboratively together? And I guess one thing that I would suggest might be invite you to say, hey, how can I come alongside you and use your process? Many times, and I'm not saying all the time, but many times as counselors, we want them to use our process, right? And that's where sometimes we get the friction of like, well, I'm not a counselor, I don't do that. Like, how do we join them in where they are as a grade level teams of teachers and run our stuff through their processes? So that was one thing that I was thinking about that you might be wondering. The second piece would be the power of that collaborative team. Notice how those discussions around instruction are more targeted, and you get away from a collaborative team meeting where frustration rises, or like, they just need to be more responsible. Like, these kids need to be more responsible. Well, what does that mean? But when we're having conversations around a targeted, specific behavior or skill that we're trying to teach kids, it targets that conversation among a group of educators just more specifically, which then provides actually more actionable data than just like, well, they need to be more responsible. And we all throw our hands up and be like, yeah, I wish they were. Like, what do we do now? This is definitely more targeted. And then the last piece that I was thinking about, where it helps us as school counselors and social workers, is learning from our teachers. Their expertise in instructional practice, engaging lessons, creating lessons, helps what I call the difference between presenting information and teaching, and then ultimately learning, which is our goal, right? As a counselor, I was very good at presenting information. I could come in and have a great slide and tell them all the things that they should be doing, and I was a great presenter. I'm not sure how much I dived into what actual teaching looks like. And so when we, as school counselors and social workers, are partnering with our grade level teams, leveraging their expertise to help us be better instructors, better educators, it is such a two-way street where we begin to then work together. I just think that that's a huge thing. So the process of using their language, their processes, the power of a specific collaborative team discussion, and then how it helps us think more about what does real true teaching look like versus presenting, really helps that two-way street learning. And as Nicole's going to show you, like, this is how we get targeted. We get rubrics and we're specific on what that skill is.
Yeah, and the teachers, I mean, I've learned so much in doing different cycles and the ways that they showed me, like I had never really used Google Forms in the same ways that they were doing. And they were really, they whipped up this rubric. So this is for a kindergarten cycle that I'm doing now. And I told them, because the cycle I did with them last year, they used a checklist. And like, girl, that just didn't feel good. Like at the end, we didn't feel like we had good data. And I said, first grade did a rubric. And they were like, oh, get out of the way. I can make a rubric. And not only did they make one, they made an amazing rubric. And it looks cute. So that's for sure. One of the things is that the teams are teaching me a lot and they feel really good about it. And every single time I feel like we're walking away with a really good product and a really good understanding of what we need to be doing. So there's just a couple more examples of we're doing the beginning of the year with kindergarten. So this is what they're doing right now. And then they'll assess it. And when those kiddos, if they have those lagging skills in those areas, they even have it broken down. So if I find that a student is really proficient in most of them, but they're really having a hard time with sharing and taking turns, they don't need a tier 2 intervention for 8 to 12 weeks on all the other things if they're only really needing to pinpoint that sharing and taking turns and practicing that and what that might look like. And there might be a couple other kids in the same boat. So with all of this data that we're getting, we're able to really respond to their needs rather than me telling kindergarten, okay, hey, who's having a hard time adjusting to school? Who wants to be in a social skills group? And then me getting 35 kids that have all sorts of different needs, and I don't really get to meet all of them. I will kind of go through a little bit of what Kyle was saying of the things that we've learned. For each question, it was a little bit different. So what do we want kids to learn? Well, we like with fourth grade, they told me, when I asked them what they wanted, I just didn't want them to keep tattling. I wanted them to stop tattling so much. But now they'll say, I want them to use an iMessage and I want them to use it the right way. I want them to be assertive in their way to do it. Third grade had told me when I asked them, what do you guys want to work on? I said, they just want students to calm down. Like they just need to figure out how to regulate. And we did have a really great discussion about the prefrontal cortex and how we're still working on those skills. So how do we do it? And students know when they're feeling stressed and can choose an appropriate strategy. And when we look at those pre and post assessments, it felt really clunky at first. It was really hard. And there were times where I would leave the meeting and go straight into my principal's office and say, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. I cannot believe I am trying to squeeze these employability skills into a PLC cycle. It's just not it's not worth it. It's not good. But then we would talk about it. We would look at some different ideas. And the next week I would go back to the PLC meeting and they would already have figured out some different ideas, brought some different things to the table. And we would just keep going, trying tweaking things. And then we realized those kids that actually really need it, both the kids that need the help, and we have kids that are now like leaders and we're able to shine a light on them too. That was a big piece that the teachers, the feedback that they gave me was like, they really felt excited about identifying kids that could do different things throughout the school in a leadership capacity. Then just to kind of wrap it up, that the teachers really feel like they understand the essential skills. They are thinking more about what does proficiency look like. It's something that they didn't think about before. They just knew that they wanted kids to do the right thing and treat people right. And they just wanted them to show up and do that. The teachers told me that they really enjoy teaching the lessons. They're like, man, you got to have all the fun before. And now it's just something different about sitting down and teaching them these skills. And they feel like they are then talking about them throughout the rest of their day. After doing the collaboration unit, the fourth grade team, as I was kind of like exiting with them, they were like, oh, and then when we start this next book in our next unit, we're going to be able to go back to the collaboration skills and talk about the characters using those and what they could have done differently. And I was like, guys, this is amazing, because now it's not just that 30 minutes that I come once a month, or even that 15 minutes of that morning meeting, and then essential skills is done for the day. Now it's throughout the whole day, they're applying the skills, they're talking about them and using them all day long, which is really what we want. And yeah, it's just a couple, it's okay to not get it right. But in the long run, it really does, they can kind of take it and run with it on their own. So this year, I started this last year, and this year my 3rd and 4th grade teams are currently doing the cycles I did with them last year now, because they wanted to start off with that, building those collaboration and regulation skills. I'm not a part of it because I'm working with 1st grade right now, but that's okay because I don't have to be. They already have it all defined. They have it figured out. They're tweaking things as they're going through and asking me for help. They've come a couple of times and said, hey, do you have a book about this? Or what do you think we should do to teach this? And I'm able to give them support. And then they're going to give me all that data and we're going to work on those tier 2 interventions. I think that's about it. Anything else, Kyle?
Yeah, no, I think we'll open it up to questions if anyone needs it, but I'll kind of end with this, that Nicole loves it when I say this multiple times, but this is about progress over perfection, right? This is not a perfect process, but as you can see how we've evolved from just like morning meetings, that's it, that's where we do it, or it's just the counselor lesson, that's where we do, like, continuing to having progress. We'll never get it perfect. It'll never be where it needs to be, but we continue to move the needle a little bit and have some progress. So dream big is kind of my thing, but start small. And the biggest part of all of that is start. So a good place to start, find a grade level that works for you, that may be interested in doing it, and go to them and say, what do your kids need? Let's really identify what are those essential things. And then let's partner together to see how we can teach them, right? As a way better, what we've found is a way better way to do it than here's a scope and sequence of lessons. You go ahead and teach them, and then, let me know if you need any help. This is it's a shift, right? Like where we started, like we shifted our mindset a little bit, and it's continuing to make progress over what we want perfection. So probably, Amanda, I know there's some things that you wanted to say here toward the end. We got about 3 minutes left, it looks like.
This was so good, both of you. This is awesome. I mean, really, the work that you've done on this, it's amazing. I love it. I want everybody to hear this presentation. And you did a great job of modeling. I know, Kyle, you mentioned like presenting versus teaching. Like you did a great job of modeling that, just really teaching what this looked like. And great job. So thank you both. The other thing I made note of is the fact that you mentioned this a couple of times is not only is this, helping to identify those tier 2 students, but also those kids that you can enrich and help them to become better leaders. So I made note of that too. I really liked that and appreciated that as well. So thank you again. I did want to ask for your lessons and everything you kind of linked in and your videos and all of that. Do you pull that from one source, or is that just kind of a hodge of things that you pulled together? I was just curious about that.
It's just kind of from all over. I have a couple of, like those teacher paid teachers, people that I love, that I use from that. And then just going to my bookshelf and looking through some of those things. And so now I will say, like yesterday I was with 1st grade and they all brought stuff. So that was part of their task from the week before. We were trying to figure out how are we going to teach a specific task, and they all brought different items and different, either like a couple of them brought some games that they had. So the teachers really have great resources. And then one teacher sat down and she created this whole great thing for them. I mean, they're much faster than me. So it went from me bringing all the resources and saying, here's some stuff that you can use, to now it's way more collaborative with the team.
They're bought in. They see the they see the benefits of doing this, I'm sure, with their kids every day. So that's great. Okay, well, thank you again. PGP and very short evaluation link is here if you do want to get PGP point for your attendance. If you fill out the short evaluation, you'll automatically then receive that certificate in your email. So be sure to do that. Some upcoming events. We have Dr. Russell Sabella joining us next week to talk about AI in school counseling. That is a virtual event. And then we have an in-person event in Indianapolis on the north side on September 27th. It's a full-day workshop. It will be in the morning. We'll be hearing about not only student and family engagement, but also kind of change and what that looks like. And then in the afternoon, we're going to have some breakout sessions with experiential wellness opportunities. We'll have a immersive sound or sound bath experience, restorative art, and then positive nutrition. So a great way for you to kind of reset and recharge, but also some great ideas to take back to staff, maybe for staff appreciation, or different staff wellness plans. So be sure to take a look at those events. And then also some other upcoming virtual events. We have a lot going on in September. So here are just a few others that I wanted to share. All of the graphics in the PowerPoint are, if you click on them, it will take you to more information and registration. And then finally, I wanted to share we're doing a new counselor cadre this year for anybody who is in a school counseling position in their first or second year. And then a counselor leadership cadre, so anybody in a leadership position at the district or building level. This is a cadre for you. So again, click on the graphics and it will take you to a lot more information. Some resources here are available if you want to check these out. I do want to reference the Indiana School Counseling Curriculum Library. This was just created this year by Inspire Success, but it was also then practicing school counselors reviewed, made tweaks to those lessons. So check those out. There are 3 lessons per grade level covering all 3 counseling domains, in addition to lessons that could be used to meet state student instructional requirements in bullying prevention, child abuse prevention, and graduation planning. So be sure to take a look there as well. And then finally, I wanted to share from our partners, there is a survey that just went out for school counselors to complete. So that is linked here, and the deadline for that is September 27th. And then finally, my contact information. With that, we did go a couple minutes over, but that's pretty good. So thanks again, Nicole and Kyle, for joining us. And we appreciate you, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay.